Hey, hi everyone, welcome back to this video series on Windows Server 2012 Introduction Group Policy. One of the strengths of Windows-based operating systems is their flexibility. End users and system administrators can configure many different options to suit the network environment and their personal tastes. However, this flexibility comes at a price generally. End users on a network should not change many of these options. For example, TCP/IP configuration and security policies should remain consistent for all client computers. In fact, end users really don't need to be able to change these types of settings in the first place, because many of them don't understand the purpose of these settings. Windows Server 2012 R2 group policies are designed to provide systems administrators with the ability to customize end user settings and to place restrictions on the type of actions that users can perform. Group policies can be easily created by system administrators and then later applied to one or more users or computers within the environment. Group policies can be easily created by system administrators and then later applied to one or more users on computers within the environment. Although they ultimately do affect registry settings, it is much easier to configure and apply settings through the use of group policy than it is to make changes to the registry manually. To make management easy, Microsoft has set up Windows Server 2008, Windows Server 2008 R2, Windows Server 2012, and Windows Server 2012 R2, so that group policy settings are all managed from within the Microsoft Management Console, MMC, in the Group Policy Management Console, GPMC. Group policies have several potential uses. I'll cover the use of group policies for software deployment, and I'll also focus on the technical background of group policies and how they apply to general configuration management. Let's begin by looking at how group policies function. Understanding group policy settings. Group policy settings are based on group policy administrative templates. These templates provide a list of user-friendly configuration options and specify the system settings to which they apply. For example, an option for a user or computer that reads "require a specific desktop wallpaper settings" would map to a key in the registry that maintains this value. When the option is set, the appropriate change is made in the registry of the affected users and computers. By default, Windows Server 2012 comes with several administrative template files that you can use to manage common settings. Additionally, system administrators and application developers can create their own administrative template files to set options for specific functionality. Most group policy items have 3 different setting options enabled. Specifies that a setting for this GPO has been configured. Some settings require values or options to be set disabled. Specifies that this option is disabled for client computers. Note that disabling an option is a setting. That is, it specifies that the system administrator wants to disallow certain functionality. Not configured specifies that these settings have been neither enabled nor disabled. Not configured is the default option for most settings. It simply states that this group policy will not specify an option and that other policy settings may take precedence. The specific options available and their effects will depend on the setting. Often you will need additional information. For example, when setting the account lockout policy, you must specify how many bad login attempts may be made before the account is locked out. With this in mind, let's look at the types of user and computer settings that can be managed. Group policy settings can apply to two types of Active Directory objects: user objects and computer objects, because both users and computers can be placed into groups and organized within OUs. This type of configuration simplifies the management of hundreds or even thousands of computers. The main options you can configure within user and computer group policies are as follows. Software settings. The software settings option applied to specific applications and software that might be installed on your computer. System administrators can use these settings to make new applications available to end users and to control the default configuration for these applications. Windows settings. The Windows settings option allows system administrators to customize the behavior of the Windows operating system. The specific options that are available here are divided into two types: user and computer. User-specific settings let you configure Internet Explorer, including the default homepage and other settings. Computer settings include security settings such as account policy and event log option. Administrative templates. Administrative templates are used to configure user and computer settings further. In addition to the default options available, system administrators can create their own administrative templates with custom options. Group policy preferences. The Windows Server 2012 R2 operating system includes group policy preferences, GPPs, which give you more than 20 new group policy extensions. These extensions in turn give you a vaster range of configurable settings within a group policy object. Included in the new group policy preference extensions are settings for folder options, mapped drives, printers, the registry, local users and groups, scheduled tasks, services, and the start menu. Besides providing easier management, group policy preference gives an administrator the ability to deploy settings for client computers without restricting the users from changing the settings. This gives an administrator the flexibility needed to decide which settings to enforce and which not to enforce. Figure 6.1 shows some of the options you can configure with group policy. ADMX Central Store. Another consideration in GPO settings is whether to set up an ADMX Central Store. GPO administrative template files are saved as ADMX files and AMXL.AMXL for the supported languages. To get the most benefit out of using administrative templates, you should create an ADMX Central Store. You create the central store in the sysvol folder on a domain controller. The central store is the repository for all of your administrative templates, and the group policy tools check it. The group policy tools then use any ADMX files that they find in the central store. These files then replicate to all domain controllers in the domain. If you want your clients to be able to edit domain-based GPOs by using the ADMX files that are stored in the ADMX Central Store, you must be using Windows Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8, Server 2008, Server 2008 R2, Server 2012, or Server 2012 R2. Security template. Security template are used to configure security settings through a GPO. Some of the security settings that can be configured are settings for account policies, local policies, event logs, restricted groups, system services, and the registry. Starter GPOs. Starter group policy objects give administrators the ability to store a collection of administrative template policy settings. in a single object. Administrators then have the ability to import and export starter GPOs to distribute the GPOs easily to other environments. When a GPO is created from a starter GPO, as with any template, the new GPO receives the settings and values that were defined from the administrative template policy in the starter GPO. The security settings section of the GPO. One of the most important sections of a GPO is the security settings section. The security settings section under the Windows settings section allows an administrator to secure many aspects of the computer and user policies. The following are some of the configurable options for the security settings section. Computer section only of the GPO: account policies, local policies, event policies, restricted groups, system services registry, file system, wired network, Windows firewall with advanced security, network list manager policies, wireless networks, network access protection, application control policies, IP security policies, advanced audit policy configuration, computer and user sections of the GPO, public key policies, software restriction policy, restricted groups. The restricted groups settings allow you to control group memberships by using a GPO. The group membership I'm referring to is the normal Active Directory groups: domain, local, global, and universal. The settings offer two configurable properties: members and members of. The users on the members list do not belong to the restricted group. The users on the members of list do belong to the restricted group. When you configure a restricted group policy, members of the restricted group that are not on the members list are removed. Users who are on the members list who are not currently a member of the restricted group are added. Software restriction policies. Software restriction policies allow administrators to identify software and to control its ability to run on the user's local computer, organizational unit, domain, or site. This prevents users from installing unauthorized software. Software restriction policy is discussed in greater detail in this chapter in the Implementing Software Deployment section. Group policy objects. So far, I have discussed what group policies are designed to do. Now it's time to drill down to determine exactly how you can set up and configure them. To make them easier to manage, group policies may be placed in items called group policy objects, GPOs. GPOs act as containers for the settings made within group policy files, which simplifies the management of settings. For example, as a system administrator, you might have different policies for users and computers in different departments. Based introducing group policy 301 on these requirements, you could create a GPO for members of the sales department and another for members of the engineering department. Then you could apply the GPOs to the OU for each department. Another important concept you need to understand is that group policy settings are hierarchical. That is, system administrators can apply group policy settings at 4 different levels. These levels determine the GPO processing priority. Local. Every Windows operating system computer has one group policy object that is stored locally. This GPO functions for both computer and the user group policy processing sites. At the highest level, system administrators can configure GPOs to apply to entire sites within an Active Directory environment. These settings apply to all of the domains and servers that are part of a site. Group policy settings managed at the site level may apply to more than one domain within the same forest. Therefore, they are useful when you want to make settings that apply to all of the domains within an Active Directory tree or forest domains. Domains are the third level to which system administrators can assign GPOs. GPO settings placed at the domain level will apply to all of the user and computer objects within the domain. Usually, system administrators make master settings at the domain level. Organizational units, the most granular level of settings for GPOs is the OU level. By configuring group policy options for OU, system administrators can take advantage of the hierarchical structure of Active Directory. If the OU structure is planned well, you will find it easy to make logical GPO assignments for various business units at the OU level. Based on the business need and the organization of the Active Directory environment, system administrators might decide to set up group policy settings at any of these four levels. Because the settings are cumulative by default, a user object might receive policy settings from the site level, from the domain level, and from the OUs in which it is contained. Group policy inheritance. In most cases, group policy settings are cumulative. For example, a GPO at the domain level might specify that all users within the domain must change their password every 60 days, and the GPO at the OU level might specify the default desktop background for all users and computers within that OU. In this case, both settings apply, so users within the OU are forced to change their password every 60 days and have the default desktop setting. What happens if there's a conflict in the settings? For example, suppose you create a scenario where a GPO at the site level specifies that users are to use red wallpaper, and another GPO at the OU level specifies that they must use green wallpaper. The users at the OU layer would have green wallpaper by default. Although hypothetical, this raises an important point about inheritance. By default, these settings at the most specific level, in this case, the OU that contains the user object, override those at more general levels. As a friend of mine from Microsoft always says, last one to apply wins. Although the default behavior is for settings to be cumulative and inherited, system administrators can modify this behavior. They can set two main options at the various levels to which GPOs might apply. Block policy inheritance. The block policy inheritance option specifies that group policy settings for an object are not inherited from its parents. You might use this, for example, when a child OU requires completely different settings from a parent OU. Note, however, that you should manage blocking policy inheritance carefully, because this option allows other system administrators to override the settings made at higher levels. Forced policy inheritance. The enforced option, sometimes referred to as no override, can be placed on a parent object, and it ensures that all lower level objects inherit these settings. In some cases, system administrators want to ensure that group policy inheritance is not blocked at other levels. For example, suppose it is corporate policy that all network accounts are locked out after 5 incorrect password attempts. In this case, you would not want lower system administrators to override the option with other settings. System administrators generally use this option when they want to enforce a specific setting globally. For example, if a password exploration policy should apply to all users and computers within a domain. A GPO with the force policy inheritance option enabled could be created at the domain level. You must consider one final case. If a conflict exists between the computer and user settings, the user settings take effect. If, for instance, a system administrator applies a default desktop setting for the computer policy and a different default desktop setting for the user policy, the one they specify in the user policy takes effect. This is because the user settings are more specific and they allow system administrators to make changes for individual users regardless of the computer they're using. So I'm going to leave it here today for this video. If you like listening, please consider like, sharing and subscribing. Thank you.